Welcome back, everyone. Dr. Linder. In this next video, this next short video, we'll be talking about anaerobic glycolysis. Now, we have glycogen. Now, what is glycogen? All it is glucose that's stored. Now, you can store glucose in the liver and you can store it in muscle. So here we have muscle glycogen. That can be converted into glucose. Okay. Now, glucose can be broken down in, remember, glucose looks like this. It's that 6-carbon sugar. And it can, when this bond is broken here, we call it glycolysis. It's broken down into pyruvic acid or pyruvate, which is 2 3-carbon sugars. Now, if oxygen is available, pyruvic acid goes into the mitochondria. M for mitochondria. But you need to have oxygen present. If oxygen is not available, pyruvic acid gets converted into this sugar, lactic acid. Okay, that's what can give people a little bit of a burning sensation, right? The old school used to say you get your metabolites that are accumulating, you get lactic acid buildup, and you can feel this burn. It's not really the lactic acid that's doing it. It's all the hydrogens that are accumulating. That type of acidity can create that burn. So this is anaerobic glycolysis because there is no oxygen that's available. So pyruvate can't go into the mitochondria to produce ATP. It goes into lactic acid. Now, lactic acid can be converted back into glucose. It does so by a cycle called the Cori cycle. It's the removal of lactic acid by the liver, and the liver converts the lactic acid back into pyruvate. And then pyruvate can be converted back into glucose. Okay? So here we see the muscle and we see the liver, right? These are two different places that glucose can be stored. So glucose is broken down by glycolysis into pyruvate. If oxygen is not available, right? Let's put O2 for oxygen. We'll put an X through it. Oxygen is not available, so now we get lactic acid. Now you're resting, you're huffing, you're puffing, you're out of breath, you have no more energy. That's when you have no more oxygen available, so you get lactic acid. Lactic acid is going to go into the blood, find its way into the liver. Lactic acid uses the same enzyme it used here, lactic dehydrogenase, and it converts lactic acid back into pyruvic acid, or lactate into pyruvate. Pyruvate can become glucose. That method is called gluconeogenesis, right? When you break down sugar, you have gluco or glycolysis. Lysis is to split. But when you're making new glucose, glucose new production, glucose neogenesis. That's the Cori cycle. Now, this is what they claim that Lance Armstrong had an amazing Cori cycle, so he never got fatigued. He had such an amazing Cori cycle, this ability to convert lactic acid back into glucose, that this guy would never get exhausted. We know how that turned out, right? He was doping. He was he was taking EPO, erythropoietin, or doping, artificial erythropoietin, to produce more red blood cells. More red blood cells carry hemoglobin. Hemoglobin can carry more oxygen. The more oxygen delivery, the less lactic acid accumulation, because the more oxygen that's available, pyruvate can go right into the mitochondria for ATP production. So for cellular respiration, we get proteins that are broken down into amino acids. We have fatty acids that are broken down into triglycerides. And then we have glucose that can be broken down into pyruvic acid, that can enter the mitochondria to produce ATP. And its byproduct is going to be heat. That's why we perspire at the gym. We push out carbon dioxide and water. Those are you know, the final byproducts of energy production. And the duration of the energy provided can serve us from minutes to hours, really depending. And marathon runners know this because what happens when they deplete creatine phosphate, which only lasts 15 seconds, then they're in this state of burning glucose, and that can last for minutes to hours. But when there's no more glucose, then what? We got to tap into the reserves. You go into the muscle. And then that's why most marathon runners aren't short and stocky powerlifter types like me, right? They're kind of tall and slanky, right? They have long, slender bodies because they're using their muscles for fuel. But we all seen those videos where the person is approaching the finish line, and it's called hitting the wall. When there's no more energy production, there's no more ATP, their muscles have no fuel, they have no goo, right? There's no goo, they're not consuming glucose in their mouth to keep that energy production going, that sticky goo stuff that many marathon runners use. So then it goes into the liver. The liver stores glucose as glycogen, but there's no more there. They've been running for hours. There's no more. The nervous system just starts to malfunction. They have no balance. Their muscles cramp. They can't stand. They're crawling across the finish line, and if they're blessed enough, another moral, ethical runner stops. They lift them up and help them cross through the finish line, right? That's hitting the wall. So where does the muscle fatigue come from? Well, the onset of the fatigue can happen from inadequate release of calcium from the sarcoplasmic reticulum. It could be depletion of creatine phosphate, maybe depletion of oxygen, maybe nutrients. Maybe they don't have B1, B2, or B3. Maybe they don't have B vitamins. Maybe they don't have enough iron. Maybe they're anemic. Maybe they don't have CoQ10. They don't have ubiquinol. There's lots of nutrients needed. Maybe they have the buildup of lactic acid and ADP. Maybe there's not sufficient release of the neurotransmitter acetylcholine at the neuromuscular junction. All of these things can result in fatigue, all of them. So this is the reason why we breathe so heavily when we're exercising, is really to pay back the oxygen debt so that we can replenish the creatine phosphate stores. We huff and puff to get our oxygen levels back up to convert lactate back to pyruvate, which can reload oxygen onto the myoglobin of muscle. When we come back, we'll talk about fast twitch and slow twitch fibers.